piled up. The spirit of the bride would not be denied. Desperation led Marianne and Elias to propose a daring, dangerous plan. A group would venture into the heart of the forest, to the ancient oak where Clara was found, and perform a ritual to appease the spirit. The ritual, detailed in a text, required to summon the spirit and request on how to appease her. "I'll go," Elias said, despite the fear in his eyes. A small group of villagers, armed with touch, followed Elias into the forest that night. As they approached the ancient oak, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence enveloped them. Not even the crickets dared to chirp. The ritual began. Marianne chanted the incantation, her voice echoing in the stillness. The villagers placed their offering at the base of the oak. Wine and herbs gathered from the forest's edge. Finally, Elise stepped forward, a dagger in his hand. "I do this for Eldermoor," he said. With one swift motion, he cut his palm, letting his blood drip onto the blackened earth. The group trembled as the oak groaned as if alive, its branches twisting. A figure began to emerge from the shadows. A woman with eyes like burning fire and a form that shifted between human and spirit. "Your ancestors have betrayed me and have taken away what's mine. Cursed him to roam the earth alone for all eternity. Now you offer this?" Marianne stepped forward, trembling. "We seek to restore balance," she said. "We offer what we can, in hopes for your forgiveness." Chapter 2. The Spirit Bride's Tale. The spirit bride's gaze bore into Marianne's eyes, her voice echoing softly, but with the weight of centuries. "Balance cannot be bought so easily," she said. "You must understand what truly happened before you can seek to make restitution." The air around them grew colder, the flames of the lanterns burning low as if bending to her will. She drew closer, her form shining in the moonlight. "Let me take you back," she murmured, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Back to a time before the darkness consumed Eldermoor." The vision unfolded like a forgotten dream, pulling them into a story from centuries past. Long ago, when the village of Eldermoor thrived in peace, there lived a beautiful young woman named Lenora. Her beauty was not only in her appearance, but also in her heart, a heart that belongs entirely to Lucian, a spirited young man with a soul as fierce as it was kind. Their love was the talk of the village, a bond so pure that it seemed to shine brighter than the sun. Everywhere they went, they were met with admiration and whispers of envy. "They are destined for greatness," the villagers would say, but not everyone shared in the joy of their love. Lenora's elder brother, Alaric, was consumed by jealousy. He had always been protective of his sister, but his envy ran deeper than mere brotherly concern. Lenora's happiness with Lucian only served to remind him of his own loneliness, his own failures. On the eve of Lenora and Lucian's wedding, Alaric's bitterness reached its breaking point. Driven by his hatred and twisted longing to tear them apart, he sought out forbidden knowledge from the shadowed corners of Eldermoor. He found an old witch who whispered secrets of ancient curses, and with her help, he cast a spell so cruel that it would change the fate of Lenora, Lucian, and the village forever. The curse was simple but devastating. Lenora would die on her wedding night, and Lucian would be condemned to roam the earth as a vampire for all eternity. Even in death, Alaric had sneered, "They will never truly be together." But his cruelty did not end there. Alaric, knowing the fear the villagers held for anything unnatural, spread a vile rumor that Lenora was practicing dark magic. He claimed she had bewitched Lucian and that their union would bring ruin to Eldermoor. The villagers, blinded by fear and swayed by Alaric's manipulations, turned against Lenora. On what should have been a night of joy and celebration, Lenora was dragged from her home, still in her wedding dress. The villagers, torches in hand and fear in their hearts, accused her of witchcraft. She pleaded her innocence, her cries falling on deaf ears as Lucian fought against the crowd to save her. But the mob was relentless. They bound Lenora to a stake and lit the fire, their faces full of rage and terror as the flames consumed her. Her final cries echoed through the night, a haunting melody of despair and betrayal. Lucian, overwhelmed with grief and fury, felt the curse take hold. His body twisted in agony as he transformed into something inhuman. His teeth sharpened, his eyes burned with an otherworldly light, and a thirst for blood overtook him. The villagers fled in terror, leaving him to mourn over the ashes of his beloved. Lenora's soul, unable to find peace, lingered in the afterlife. Betrayed by her own blood and burned by those she had trusted, her spirit became vengeful. The village of Eldermoor, once her home, became a place of terror. Her anger spread into the land, cursing it with misfortune and despair. Lucian, now a creature of the night, wandered the earth, unable to die, unable to love again. He searched for a way to break the curse, hoping to reunite with Lenora in the afterlife, but the years turned into centuries, and hope faded into despair. Eldermoor's darkness only grew as generations passed. Whispers of the spirit bride and the cursed vampire became legend, a cautionary tale told to scare children. Alaric compelled the witch to cast a spell to bind me and Lucian to eternal sleep under the oak tree, only to be awakened by human blood. Few weeks ago, some drunk men came by the oak. One mistakenly cut himself with a dagger, and his blood spilled on the oak, breaking the spell. It freed me and Lucian from eternal sleep. The spirit bride's voice grew softer, filled with a deep sorrow. For centuries, I have waited. My soul has cried out for release, but the curse binds me still. Balance must be restored, and there is only one way. She paused. I can only be reborn through a descendant of my bloodline. Someone who carries the remnants of my essence must unite with Lucian in marriage. Only then will the curse be broken, and the terror in Eldermoor will cease forever. The villagers shook in fear, the weight of the revelation sinking in. But what if they fail? Lenora's form changed to her former self, her sorrow replaced by hope. If they fail, the curse will remain, and Eldermoor will be lost to the darkness. But if they succeed, she looked toward the woods, where the shadows seemed to twist. Perhaps, at long last, I will find peace. The villagers, now burdened with the truth, knew what had to be done. Eldermoor's salvation rested on their shoulders to find the one who carried Lenora's essence. With determination in their heart, they vowed to find the one who could fulfill Lenora's wish and end the centuries-old curse. As they turned to leave, Lenora's voice echoed softly behind them. Remember, love is the only force strong enough to break this curse. But it must be true and pure. Only then will Eldermoor be free. The air grew still as her presence faded, leaving the then alone with the weight of the task ahead. The journey to undo the past had begun, and the fate of Eldermoor rested on them. Chapter 3: The Whispered Curse. The village of Eldermoor, covered in endless fog, seemed trapped in time. It was a place where the cobblestone streets echoed with the footsteps of gossiping neighbors, where candles burned long into the night, casting shadows that danced on the cracked walls of weather-worn hut. Stories, as old as the church in the village square, hung in the air like the mist itself, ever-present, chilling, and impossible to escape. Elise, the sewer's daughter, had heard the tales her whole life. As a child, she'd sat cross-legged on the wooden floor of her family's modest shop, watching her mother work delicate threads into elaborate patterns. It was here that Elise first learned of the legend of the Bride of Eldermoor, a woman who died on her wedding night centuries ago and returned as a vengeful spirit. They say she walks the woods, her mother had whispered once, the candlelight casting shadows on her face. Still wearing her wedding gown, searching for the life stolen from her. Elise had laughed then, dismissing it as nothing more than a tale to frighten children into staying indoors after dark. But as she grew older, she noticed how the villagers spoke in fearful tones whenever the bride was mentioned, their eyes moving nervously to the forest on the village's edge. Now 17, Elise thought herself above such nonsense. Legends didn't mend dresses or pay for bread. She had little time for ghost stories when her days were filled with hemming skirts and sewing buttonholes. But one afternoon, as she ventured into the woods to collect herbs for her mother's teas, she stumbled upon something that made her question everything she thought she knew. The air in the forest was colder, the fog thicker, covering the sound of her footsteps. Elise kept her eyes on the ground, scanning for lavender and chamomile. That's when she saw it, a tattered piece of fabric caught on the low branch of an oak tree. Curious, she stepped closer. Her fingers brushed against the fabric. It was a veil. Complex lacework, though frayed and stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. The air seemed to be still around her, the forest unnaturally silent. Elise. The sound of her name shattered the quiet, and she spun around to see her childhood friend, Peter, running toward her. His cheeks were flushed as he caught his breath. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. "I could ask you the same," Elise retorted, hiding the veil behind her back. Peter, glancing nervously at the trees. "You shouldn't be out here alone. People have been talking. Strange things are happening again." "Strange things," Elise echoed. "Let me guess, someone saw the bride?" Peter's expression darkened. "I'm serious, Elise. Last night, old Mr. Carter swore he saw a woman in white standing by the river. And the miller's boy said he heard someone crying in the woods at dawn. You should stay away from this place." Elise wanted to laugh, but the weight of the veil in her hand made her pause. "It's just stories, Peter. Stories and shadows." "Then what's that?" Peter pointed to her hand, and she reluctantly revealed the veil. His eyes widened. "Where did you find that?" "It was caught on a branch," she said. "Probably someone's idea of a joke." "That's not funny," Peter said. "You should burn it. Get rid of it before." "Before what?" Elise challenged, though her voice lacked the conviction she intended. Peter hesitated, his gaze back to the trees. "Before she comes for it." Elise scoffed, but the unease in Peter's voice planted a seed of doubt in her mind. She tucked the veil into her basket and turned toward the village. "Come on, let's go before it gets dark." They walked back in silence, the forest pressing in on them. Elise could feel Peter's unease, and it only heightened her own. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the sun had dipped below the horizon. That night, Elise couldn't sleep. The veil lay hidden under her bed, but it seemed to call to her, its presence a weight she couldn't ignore. She lit a candle and pulled it out, running her fingers over the delicate lace. Who had worn this? Why was it stained? As the candle burned, a sudden chill filled the room. The flames danced wildly, casting strange patterns on the walls. Elise froze, her breath catching in her throat. And then she heard it, a faint whisper, like the rustle of fabric in the wind. Elise. Her name, carried on a breath of air. She spun around, but the room was empty. Heart pounding, she stuffed the veil back into the basket and blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness. The following days brought more whispers, more shadows. The villagers spoke of missing livestock, of strange markings on doors. And always, their eyes strayed to the forest. Elise tried to go about her work, but the veil haunted her. She began to notice strange things, her reflection in the mirror lingering a moment too long, the feeling of being watched even when she was alone. One evening, unable to bear it any longer, she confronted her mother. "What do you know about the bride of Eldermoor?" Her mother's hands were firm on the fabric she was stitching, her face pale. "Why are you asking about that?" I found something in the woods," Elise said carefully. "A veil." Her mother's eyes widened in horror. "You should have left it there. That curse has nothing to do with us." "Curse?" Elise pressed. Her mother hesitated, then sighed heavily. "The bride was from our family, Elise. Betrayed on her wedding night, left to die in the forest. The villagers say she swore vengeance, binding her spirit to the land. But it's just a story." "It doesn't feel like just a story," Elise murmured, thinking of the whispers, the shadows. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever it is, you mustn't let it consume you. Burn the veil and forget about it." But Elise couldn't forget. Something about the veil, about the whispers, felt personal, like a call she couldn't ignore. That night, she made a decision. She would return to the woods, to the place where she found the veil. She needed answers. As the moon rose high above Eldermoor, Elise stepped into the forest once more, the veil tucked under her arm. The fog swirled around her, the trees like a silent watchman. And then she heard it, a soft, mournful wail carried on the wind. "Elise." The sound made her tremble, but she pressed on, her heart pounding. She reached the oak tree where she had found the veil, and there, in the moonlight, she managed, her voice trembling. "Someone untrained," he said. Elise ignored his hand and stepped back. "Who are you? And why have you been following me?" The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "My name is Lucian. As for why I've been watching you, let's just say we share a connection." "A connection?" Elise repeated, her fear giving way to irritation. "You're a stranger." Lucian's smile faded. "Perhaps now, but not for long." Before she could respond, he turned and began to walk away. "Wait," she called after him. "You saved me. I deserve answers." Lucian paused but didn't turn around. "The answers you seek are dangerous. If you want to know the truth, meet me here tomorrow at dusk. Until then, stay away from the woods." And just like that, he vanished into the shadows, leaving Elise more confused than ever. The next day was a blur. Elise went about her chores in a confusion, replaying the encounter over and over in her mind. Who was Lucian? What did he mean by a connection? And why did his presence, though frightening, feel oddly familiar? By the time the sun began to set, Elise had made up her mind. She would meet Lucian. Whatever secrets he held, she needed to know them. Dressed in a simple cloak, she made her way to the woods. The air was cooler than usual, and the mist seemed to part for her as she walked. When she reached the clearing where the encounter had taken place, Lucian was already there. "You came," he said, his voice soft but pleased. "I want answers," Elise said. "No riddles. No warnings. Just the truth." Lucian nodded. "Very well. The truth, then." He stepped closer, and for the first time, Elise noticed the sharp angles of his face, the inhuman perfection of his features. "I am a vampire," he said. Elise's breath caught. "A vampire?" "Yes," he said. "And you are not as ordinary as you believe." When she reached the clearing, Lucian was waiting, his figure still as a statue, his eyes fixed on her. "You're late," he said softly. Elise folded her arms. "I had errands to run. Believe it or not, I still have a life outside these woods." A faint smile touched Lucian's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "For now." Elise sighed, brushing a stray curl from her face. "You said you'd explain more about the curse tonight." Lucian hesitated, his gaze shifted to the shadows around them. "I will. But first, tell me, have you sensed anything unusual? Felt as though you were being followed." Elise frowned. No. Why? Before Lucian could answer, a sharp crack echoed through the clearing, like a branch snapping underfoot. Lucian's appearance changed instantly. He moved in front of Elise, his posture tense, his eyes scanning the trees. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice low and commanding. A figure stepped into the moonlight. Elise's breath caught as she recognized her friend Peter. His bow was drawn, the arrow aimed directly at Lucian's chest. "Peter? What are you doing here?" Elise asked. "I should be asking you that," Peter snapped, his eyes never leaving Lucian. "How long have you been sneaking off to meet him?" Elise stepped forward, but Lucian's arm shot out, holding her back. "Peter, it's not what you think," she said. "Not what I think?" Peter barked a humorless laugh. "You've been consorting with a monster, Elise. Do you know what he is?" "I know," Elise said, her voice steady now. "And he's not what you think." "He's a vampire," Peter spat. "And he's using you. Don't you see that?" "I don't need to explain myself to you, Hunter," Lucian replied. "Hunter? Peter, what is he talking about?" Elise asked, surprised. Peter finally looked at her, his expression pained. "I didn't want you to find out this way. But yes, I'm a hunter. My family has been part of the Order of the Vail for generations. We protect this village from creatures like him." Elise shook her head. "You lied to me. All this time, you never said a word." "I was protecting "You don't have a choice," Peter's father said. "You're part of this whether you like it or not." Later, Lucian turned away. You're braver than anyone I've ever known. Before Elise could respond, the sound of snapping twigs echoed through the trees. Both of them froze. They're here, Lucian said. Elise glanced toward the broken doorway. Peter and the hunters had tracked them down. She had hoped for more time, but it seemed fate had other plans. Lucian stepped in front of her, his posture defensive. Stay behind me. No, Elise said, gripping his arm. We do this together. The first figure came from the shadows, Peter, his bow drawn and an arrow aimed directly at Lucian. Behind him, the other hunters spread out. Elise, Peter called. Step away from him. He's not worth your life. You don't understand, Elise said, despite the fears. Lucian isn't the monster you think he is. The curse, this whole nightmare, it's because of my family. I have to make it right. Peter's expression twisted in disbelief. You're risking everything for a vampire? For him? Yes, Elise said, stepping closer to Lucian. Because I believe in him. And I believe this curse needs to end for everyone. Peter looked at Lucian, then back to Elise. If you won't step aside, then I'll do what I have to. Peter shot the arrow. Lucian moved faster than Elise could comprehend, catching the arrow mid-flight and snapping it in half. I don't want to hurt you, Lucian said, but I won't let you stop us. The hunters surged forward, and chaos erupted. Lucian fought with a grace and brutality that left Elise breathless, his movements a blur as he Everyone froze, their eyes turning to her. If you want to kill him, you'll have to go through me, Elise said, stepping in front of Lucian. Elise, don't, Lucian said. I won't let this end like this, Elise said, meeting Peter's gaze. You're my friend, Peter. If you ever trusted me, then trust me now. This curse isn't just about Lucian. It's about all of us. And if we don't end it, it will destroy everything. What are you talking about? Peter asked. Elise took a deep breath. The curse is tied to my bloodline. My ancestor betrayed Lucian, and this is the result. If we don't break it, the darkness will spread. It's already starting. The strange occurrences in the village, the disappearances, that's just the beginning. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, and Peter lowered his bow slightly. And how do you plan to break it? Peter asked. Elise hesitated, her throat dry. The ritual requires a sacrifice. One of pure heart must offer their life willingly. Peter's eyes widened. You can't mean. I do, Elise said. It has to be me. No! Lucian's voice was a roar, his eyes blazing. I won't let you do this. You stay alive. Elise placed her hands over his. And I can't live knowing I could have saved you and didn't. Lucian, this isn't just about you or me. It's about breaking the cycle, ending the suffering. Before she could say more, Peter stepped forward. Wait. Elise asked. Peter looked at her, then at Lucian. If the curse was born from betrayal, maybe it can be broken by loyalty. By trust. Elise frowned. What do you mean? Think about it, Peter said. Your ancestor betrayed Lucian out of fear and jealousy. What if the opposite could break the curse? That's a dangerous gamble, Lucian said. So is a sacrifice, Peter countered. Elise looked between them. It's worth a try. Lucian hesitated, then nodded. Fine. But if it doesn't work, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it, Elise said. With the hunters standing down, Elise and Lucian approached the altar once more. Elise placed her hand over Lucian's, their fingers intertwining. Whatever happens, she said, we face it together. Lucian's grip tightened on hers. Together. As they began the ritual, the air grew thick with energy, the chapel walls trembling. The hunters watched in silence. When the final words were spoken, a blinding light filled the room, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. And then, silence. When Elise opened her eyes, she found Lucian staring at her, his red eyes now part red, part human brown. It worked, he whispered, awe in his voice. I feel the curse lifted, but I'm still a vampire. Miraine stepped forward, then observed them for a moment. Both of you are now bound by love and immortality. I'm afraid the Elise we once knew is no more. Elise, you're now part vampire, part something far beyond my comprehension. I see Elise and Lenora at the same time. Elise smiled, tears streaming down her face. It's over. But deep in her heart, she knew this was just the beginning of their story. Chapter 7. Enemy from the Past. Miraine turned to Lucian, looking curious. What have you been feeding on all these years? She asked. Lucian's eyes widened, as though the question caught him off guard. He stood slowly, holding Elise close. I only feed on animal blood, he replied earnestly. No matter how strong the urge, I've never crossed that boundary. It was difficult at first, but over time I learned to control it. He turned his attention to Elise, his expression a reassuring smile. Don't worry, he said gently. You have a good teacher now. You'll learn to control it, too. I won't let you face this alone. But Elise's face betrayed her unease. Her brows furrowed as she looked at Miraine. If Lucian has been feeding on animal blood, she began, then who has been doing all the killings? Suddenly the air in the chapel shifted. A dark cloud began to spread, covering the light through the stained glass windows. The sudden chill prickled their skin. Then, a low, menacing laugh echoed through the thick darkness, coming from all directions at once. Peter and hunters, who had been standing guard, were caught off balance. One by one, they were flung into the air as though by an invisible force, their bodies crashing to the ground with bone-cracking force. Lucian's eyes moved around, trying to catch sight of the intruder, but the figure moved with such incredible speed that even his heightened senses couldn't track it. Miraine stepped forward, her voice firm despite the chaos. Show yourself, whoever you are. The laughter stopped suddenly, replaced by silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. His features were sharp, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light, and his movements were calculated yet primal. Lucian's face hardened as recognition dawned. Alaric, he muttered, his voice filled with anger. Alaric smirked, his presence commanding. Did you really think the curse wouldn't affect me? He sneered. When I cursed Lenora and you, I never imagined it would bind me as well. But it did. Only, it turned me into something far worse than I could have anticipated. He stepped closer, his voice dripping with malice. I've roamed this earth in the shadows for centuries, trapped in this monstrous form. All I wanted was to destroy you, Lucian. of burning wood and the whispers of an ancient power now broken. Elise stood at the heart of the village square, her clothes torn and stained, her hair wild from the night's battle. Around her, the villagers gathered in silence, their faces filled with fear. Lucian stood beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly. "It's over," Elise said. Lucian turned to her, his eyes, now a warm, searching hers. "Not quite. There's still the matter of what comes next." Elise nodded, the weight of the night's events pressing heavily on her shoulders. The curse was broken, but the cost had been high. Lives were lost, and the village they both loved would never be the same. Peter approached, his bow slung over his shoulder. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes held respect. "You did it," he said. "We did it," Elise corrected. Despite their earlier conflict, she felt a surge of gratitude toward her childhood friend. He had put aside his hatred, his fear, to help her and Lucian in the end. The villagers began to murmur, their voices rising in confusion and accusation. "She's the reason for all of this," an elderly woman cried, pointing a finger at Elise. "Her bloodline brought the curse upon us." Others nodded, their fear threatening to boil over into anger. Elise stepped forward, raising her hands to calm them. "You're right," she said, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "It was my ancestors' betrayal that brought this curse upon us. But tonight, we ended it. Lucian is no longer bound by the darkness, and the evil that plagued our village is gone." "Gone," a man scoffed. "What about the lives lost? The families destroyed?" Elise swallowed hard, the guilt like a stone in her chest. "I can't undo the pain that's been caused. But I promise you this, I will dedicate my life to protecting this village, to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." Lucian stepped beside her. "And I'll stand by her. I owe this village more than I can ever repay."